Here we go. We are, in theory, very, very live here in the Nutmeg Tavern. It is Friday, finally, and we are ready to relax in the Nutmeg Tavern and have some fun, kick back, and enjoy our drinks and all that good stuff. I see people piling in from all around the world. New Zealand. You couldn't get any farther away than New Zealand, and welcome into the tavern. So let's see, that must mean it's like 4 o'clock in the morning there? I have no idea what time it is in New Zealand. But England and Minnesota and Michigan and New Jersey and Ohio and okay. So welcome everyone in. I hope you are having a good day. And we've got a simple topic today that we have talked about, at times in the past, but it's something that basically everybody interacts with at least a little bit. Even if you don't cook, you probably have some kind of kitchen you interact with, and if only you do is make toast, well, we even are going to talk about toasters. So there you go. Somebody asked early on in the chat how Kalamazoo went. And Kalamazoo was tremendous. We had just incredible weather on Saturday, of course. Sunday, it was hilarious. You walk in the morning and it's sunny, and we walk out and giant snowflakes everywhere. It's just like, okay, we're obviously in Michigan, or Indiana for that matter, 70 1 minute and snowing and 35 the next. But it was a great event, and lots of people came by and shook hands and said thank you and howdy and all that great stuff. Made a couple connections with people, and always excited to say hi and take pictures with lots and lots of people when we connect at events. So tremendous. Can't remember if there were any crazy stories that happened. I don't think so. It was pretty uneventful. I mean, other than connecting with people. Well, no strange disasters, which, about 50-50.
There's a good event right there.
Right. So that was good. Anything else I need to
I don't think so.
connect with that? Sorry if somebody said, didn't have any idea we were at Kalamazoo. If you missed us, well, that was because we tried to do the episode, on Friday to tell people about it, but of course we were early, so some people might have missed out on it. But if you are in the area next year, we'll be there again right around St. Patrick's Day. It's always about right around that weekend, so mark it on your calendar. Next year's calendar? You probably don't have it, but you could put it in your phone's calendar. How about that? Mm-hmm. Okay. So what is going on with kitchen equipment? So if we think about kitchens today, they're generally, a lot of people have pretty high-tech kitchens. We got dishwashers and all kinds of crazy appliances for cooking. I'm always amazed by the crazy cooking appliances that places make. Waffle makers and thises and that's, which I don't know how anybody has a kitchen big enough to put all those things in. Maybe no one actually does, but somehow I think they're probably all given as gifts, aren't they? And then we get them and go, wow, this is great, and then go, I have no place to put this. Then you send it to Goodwill or re-gift it to the next person, so they've got 3 waffle makers. But the same thing isn't happening in houses in the 18th century necessarily. How kitchens can look pretty darn sparse, and the obviously the complexity of the kitchen tools is very low complexity, very simple items, and yet we get some pretty complex recipes, and everybody has to eat. So I've got pictures, and I've got this wonderful inventory book. I think I'll do this inventory first, because I think it'll lead us in. And this book, incredible book, Chester County, Pennsylvania inventories from 1684 to 1850. And the person who put this book together, Margaret Schiffer, actually, I think they started a publishing company from this book and said, hey, we can publish other books. So it's funny, if you look at the book here, it's it's just typewriter. It's that classic kind of manuscript book from the what is this? So they looked at more than 10,000 inventories from that time frame, and they kind of collated the information. And come on, give me a date, guys. 1974. There we go. They went through all these inventories and they looked at all the items. They put together all these graphs. So if fabric is mentioned, what kind of fabrics were mentioned, what color were they, and they would graph it through time. So you could say, does velvet show up in the 1740s? Does it get more popular in the 1750s? It's just an amazing quantity of analysis of all this. But in the back are some example inventories that are straight out of the book. So, there's no analysis. It's just, here's a few inventories. Not 10,000 of them, obviously, or else it would be more than 400 pages long. But here's an inventory of John Hoskins, town of Chester, Pennsylvania, 1716. So this is early on. Now, poor, very, very poor people are not going to have inventories in here. Somebody dies, they're going to do an inventory. They're going to have enough of an estate that there's the point in having an inventory. But here is this inventory from 1716, and the inventories generally go around the rooms in the houses. So again, we get a picture of what's in a particular room. How many rooms did the house have? They'll even go into the barn or into the cellar and talk about that. In the kitchen of John Hoskins's house in 1716, here is the items, and the spelling is hilarious. They're like, isn't one word here, is it spelled like what we would say? And maybe the spellings help us have an idea about the way they pronounced words. So, a large iron kettle, or kettle undoubtedly, a small ditto, 2 iron pots, a small brass kettle, and a 1 brass skillet. So they got a kettle and a skillet, sorry, and one spelled cattle and the other one is spelled with a K, kettle. I don't know why there's 2 different spellings here. A pair of large hand irons. I'm not sure, an iron? Not sure exactly what we've got there. Fire shovel and a tungus. I'm not sure what that
Tongs,
something like
do you
that.
think?
Tongs, yes. Tongs. Good.
Some of them you are wondering, you're like,
Need some help here. Hand me the tungus. 3 pair Y racks. Let's see, a jack and 2 spits. So a jack, possibly like the spit jack that we had. This one may not be mechanized for the clockwork mechanism. Maybe it's just what the spits are sitting on, basically, sort of like special andirons. 5 brass candlesticks, 7 iron candlesticks. A lot of lighting that they need in the kitchen so they can cook at night. 1 pewter ditto, so another pewter candlestick. That's 13 candlesticks altogether. A brass mortar and pestle, and then 2 more candlesticks. 2 dripping pans, so pans you put underneath the items that are on the spit to catch the drippings. 2 frying pans, spelled with 2 N's. I like that. Here is a brass skillet, another brass skillet, so that apparently 2. A gridiron, 4 fire pans. I'm not sure exactly what they mean there. A tin covered colander, or it's a colander, and a cheese last. Cheese, it's probably a press. I don't know, or something. 2 small sieves, spelled S-I-V-E-S. An earthenware pitcher, a blue bottle, 2 tin 1/2 gallon and pud pans. I don't know what.
I assumed it was a pudding pan.
Yeah, it could be.
I guess, it's open to interpretation.
It's a pud pan, yes. One tin can, which is probably like a large, they're large cups, were called cans. So one large tin cup, 2 saucepans, 1 earthen pot, and 1 earthen pan, 3 wooden bowls, spelled B-O-U-L-E-S, 3 pails, 1 piggin, which is like a wooden bucket with one thing that sticks out, and 2 tubs and a dough trough. So there's an idea about the things you would find in this person's rather probably well-to-do household. It's probably way up there. I mean, he's got feather beds. He's got a clock case in the main room. There's a buttery in this, a cellar that's got barrels of beer. There's a brew house. So obviously, pretty. If you want to know what in a brew house, there's a large copper. There's 3 large brewing tubs, a cooler, a hand mill, two large troughs, 4 bushels of malt, and a garner, which I'm not sure what a garner is. But anyway, just an idea there about the inventory in a well-to-do person's house in Pennsylvania in the early 18th century. So let's look at some images. Lauren went through and found images of items themselves. What was that? Items themselves and some images of items being used. And see, I didn't touch anything. I don't know where that came from. But now I'm touching something. Here we go. I pulled this one because I love this set of images. Yeah. We talked about this set of images before. This is a set of images from Nuremberg, Germany, and they created like a yearbook, except it's for like 250 years or something, of the tradesmen in the town. And not only did they just put their names down, but they had these like little portraits of them at work.
I want a portrait of you.
Right. I mean, it's like every town should have this, right? And so here is, I don't know what the poor gentleman's name here, but he was a cook. And you can see him cooking at the hearth is actually flat. It's just a trick of the artist here, the perspective here. It isn't sloping like this.
He wanted to make sure you knew what was on the hearth.
Right. He wanted us to be able to see it. But what's in this kitchen? This is early. This might be 1500s, because this book and illustrations stretch from the early 1500s all the way up into the early 1800s. But we have an iron pot that's on a hook and a chain. We have 4 earthenware pots that you kind of slowly cook things in. These can't take a lot of heat. They're not something you get, up to 500 degrees. They're something that you would cook this very, very slowly stewed soup or stew in. So he's got them by the fire, and they will just sort of stay there the entire time. They are pitcher shaped. Sometimes one of them even looks like it might have a pitcher edge on it. You'll see these being used in a lot of different households in many different ways. There's even one kind of on the floor. We've got, remember I said there's a piggin. There's that little barrel item there. See how one ear stretches up? That might be a tub. It might be a barrel or a bucket. We can't quite see the whole thing there. He's got a knife on his waist belt there. And he has some kind of very primitive spoon. In some of these other illustrations, you will see long-handled frying pans on the wall. That's another one that's a classic for these sometimes serving dishes and plates. So we see what's in his kitchen, very rudimentary. Here is a cast iron pot from our time period. And this one they've marked. Most of these are from the Smithsonian or the Met?
There's a mix of I'd say maybe half and half between Smithsonian and Met with some other sprinkled in.
Right. This is very small. Look at the image, or the she left the sizes up for us. This one's only 6 inches to 7 inches in any of these quart, possibly 2, the maximum. If we look at the construction of it, it kind of does lock it into a time period. It's cast iron, generally earlier than say 1700. They were mostly made out of brass. There are occasionally some pots that are shaped like this that are ceramic in their nature. You'll find those also. This one, because of the shape of the ears, I would date certainly earlier than the 1850 here. It more than likely is early 18th century, at least in the ear shape. It does have a lid on it, which sometimes we do or we don't see. They're always made of a different material. Sometimes they were wood. Here's a simple iron one, and it does have a bail that we can't see very well on it. Again, they vary a lot. Notice though, it's got legs. It's meant to sit on a hearth or be hanging from a chain like we saw in the last image. We have a lot of still lifes in the time period, and some of these, they like to go into the kitchen and show us those Dutch still lives, probably, most of them from the 17th century. But the cooking ware does not change a lot until the technology of cooking changes in the early 19th century, when we start to move to cast iron stoves. So before that, the cookware stays the same in most places for hundreds of years. We've got a little sort of pseudo fry pan slash, maybe you would call it a saucepan here. It's ceramic. It's just glazed on the inside and around the handle, and probably totally unglazed on the outside. You can kind of see how the flames and the soot have built up on that. This is something that probably disappears as you get into the 18th century, or they're still there, but they're very inexpensive. These ceramic pots do not last long. They'll break, and they're meant to be quickly replaced because they're just inexpensive. And they don't travel well either, so they're generally probably a very locally made item. The copper pot behind it is just the opposite. It is a very, very expensive item, probably handed down. You can see that if it's very expensive, and it's probably the showpiece of their kitchen. And so therefore, it is very polished. It is not unheard of to see. Most of the images we see of pots like this, copper pots, brass pots, are very, very shiny.
Which is a good safety issue, whether they knew it or not.
Right. And of course, if you look at mine, they look like they've gone through the wars.
Yes.
Because I don't want to sit there and spend 3 hours cleaning my pot.
But they did, because it was
Right.
and especially as an artist, you're like, it's a status symbol to have your
Right.
pots shiny and new and
Right.
new looking.
We've got a bowl that's probably turned upside down and sitting on the table there, and then a wooden mortar and pestle, turned wooden piece. Here is an example of one of those little sort of saucepans that you would cook in. Now, it does have a rim around the inside of it, more than likely so that you could put a lid on it and it wouldn't fall down in there. The trick, though, is that if it can't be too much of a saucepan, because how would you pour out of it? It would catch on that lip. So I would say that you were probably cooking, maybe like cooking eggs in something like this, or other items that you could easily get back out of it, not just pour out of it like a sauce. So there we go, just my interpretation on that. You will find larger pieces that are constructed in the same way, even to the point of having a ceramic frying pan, like, much flatter shape. But they are very susceptible to cracking and breaking because of the thermal differences as you heat these up.
Right. When I was searching through to find pieces, a lot of what I got were pictures of fragments, because
Right.
a lot of the pottery, of course, just doesn't make it through.
Right. and you've got the pieces. And sometimes you find pictures of pieces, pictures of them broken. So here we have a set of multiple items here: the brass mortar and pestle, the brass or the copper pan that's kind of upside down, which probably again a cooking item here, a brass little saucepan that with a long handle. This one we can see with the sort of is it a candle holder in it or possibly? Anyway.
I believe it is a candle holder.
Right.
We do see some other ones that look.
And that one is tin lined because it's like brass on the outside and tin on the inside. And you can see upside down on the hearth there is again a ceramic pan with a green glaze on the outside.
And cute little legs. I like this one.
Yeah, cute little legs and little sticky out handle. Again, with those sharp edges, very susceptible to cracking and breaking with the thermal differences in heat. So you probably had to be very gentle with it and cook when you're cooking on it. And that glaze, that green color is kind of really classic and kind of probably points to a particular area. I'm not sure exactly where this one's from, but there is a brass mortar and pestle from the museums somewhere in my collection, somewhere. Sometimes I use one just like that in episodes. I have no idea where it's at. This, I believe, is Spanish and from the 18th century. But notice the cookware is almost exactly the same. We don't get too many images of people actually doing dishes in the 18th century, but she's doing the dishes.
They had to get clean somehow.
Right. It's happening. It's just not something that people think to do art about. She's got lots of, this is, again, well-to-do household because of the big inventory here of items we've got. Some of them are fairly inexpensive. The ceramic small pot there that almost looks like a mug. A larger cooking vessel right behind it. We've got some copper vessels, and then even in the background we can see things along the wall, a huge sort of kettle or something. That, it's like we're wishing that artist to turn on the light a little bit. Yeah, it's like, could you turn up the light a little bit? But obviously they want us to see her, whatever. But we want to see the pots and pans.
I was interested in her outfit.
No, she's got an interesting outfit. Even the idea here of her chemise looks like it has sleeves that go all the way down to the wrist, and yet she's rolled them up for her work, which a lot of times you don't necessarily see in a similar.
Yeah, and you mentioned that it could be Spanish, and sometimes it feels like the artists in the different areas, like we know that the Dutch tend to paint more household day-to-day scenes, and it's kind of nice to see those. The English tend to be a little more formal in their art, so it's nice to see that kind of household chores.
Our classic trammel hook, which we have one in our catalog. It's like exactly like this one, very simplistic. Now notice this is 15 inches long. It's very stout. It's meant to hold up something very heavy. And they've dated it just right there in the middle of the 18th century. You couldn't get any more simple, right?
Yes. Right?
And then we have this one, which I'll bet you $1 billion it's German. 17th century, earlier, and I don't know how you could get a more complex looking trammel.
To me, it was very funny because just the outline of it and the engineering is very complex. And then you realize that it's covered in intricate etching and you're
look at the whole thing is engraved. Who would spend a year making a trammel hook?
And then as far as I know, I didn't notice any description specifically about it, but I envisioned it as a gift, a very high profile gift.
Gift to the king, maybe. I don't know.
Yes.
Like he's in the kitchen using it. But wow, just an amazing piece of work here from the 17th century. It's amazing to look at the differences in some of the pieces. This is an early Italian kitchen, probably a frontispiece to a book, like a cookbook. Regardless, we can see the large hearth area and a very high kind of smoke chimney catching area up at the top. And why the cranes holding the pot are way up there. I don't even know what is going on. What does he reach up there with a big hook or something to move it around? And the fire would have to be 5 feet tall to get to it.
In my mind, the proportion of the picture was off, and the artist was kind of.
It could be that what he wanted was a very tall, skinny image for a book frontispiece, and so they stretched the kitchen out.
I had kind of assumed that from the proposal.
Anyway, but we can see the cranes, multiple cranes, the pots hanging up, the hooks for hanging items up toward the ceiling, and sometimes you cook with a hook like that, or just hang things up. In this case, we can see along the bottom and the right-hand side that we've got a stew stove all along the wall there, and multiple, basically, sauces or stews cooking on those stew stoves. And then he is at the large roasting spit fireplace. He's got the huge spit with the crank handle, and if you look closely there's a fire back, but there's also a screen on the side, so he can kind of hide behind that, and so it doesn't cook him while he's cooking, turning the item. And he's the turnspit. He might just be a boy or an apprentice or whatever, not the main cook person. We've got cookware or dishes. We've got large, sort of crazy-looking scimitar knives down there, a rolling pin. So lots of items, and I'm not sure about what's going on with the thing that's hanging there that looks like a piñata or something with stuff sticking out of it.
Yeah, it seems to be a storage,
right?
But I did kind of want to zoom in and and ask them, or maybe it says it, because a lot of the things are labeled, so maybe it says in Italian what it is.
What's ordegno something maybe. So maybe somebody's got an idea there.
Could be
in the chat. It's always fun for people to step in if they have a special knowledge about what's going on with that. Here is a simple pewter bowl from the time period, looking a little rough. I mean, but a lot of times items like this, when they would get to a state too beat up, they would just have the pewter melted down and turned into a new one. Very classic for this particular product. One of the nice things about pewter, unlike the other ones, is very easy to just convert it into a new product, just melt it down and start over again. This is one of the reasons why we don't have as much of it lying around. Now that was that was only 6 inches across, but look at the dimensions on this one. 14 tall, 44 inches in diameter, and weighing 273 pounds. This is a very, very large iron cooking vessel that would fit into a brick, basically a brick stove. Imagine a very large brick circle standing 3 feet tall with an area underneath so that you can have the fire. And this would just sit in the top of it. This is what a brewer might use. You would see it in all kinds of industrial situations where you were heating up large quantities of some liquid. So a dyer might be using something like this. A sugar maker who's refining sugar. You could use it in any, lots and lots of different things. I didn't have time to find an image of one of these setting into the brickwork, but you can imagine that on this. Sometimes they were made out of other metals. The fact that this is iron puts it probably a little later. Earlier, they would have been made out of brass or copper and would have been constructed out of sheet material and riveted together. Here is an image from the middle of the 18th century with another one of these kitchens where we see the dishes along the one side, large cooking platform, raised hearth area, a spit. Somebody's actually, basting it while we're watching. We've got people chopping wood, and notice the lack of cooking equipment that we have in here. Mortar and pestle, buckets, but we don't see a prep table. We don't see lots of equipment lying around. A simple rat tail spoon for eating, so we're getting into some eating equipment here. I've used this image a lot. I love this image. This is from about 1774, 1775. And it's a series of two images. There's this one and another one with a female cook in very similar kind of, they're like a matched pair. We've got the cooking vessels, randomly around there. There's a brass pan on its side, large ceramic vessel. We've got multiple hooks and baskets and meat hanging around, and we can glimpse into the kitchen proper, where we see a brickwork for cooking, like a stew stove kind of area, and a stool, or it may be actually a chopping block that's right beside it, different ceramic bowls, a rack for having spits for that spit type fireplace. We've got pictures and fun stuff as we can kind of look into this kitchen. There's a pewter pitcher, and this is again just an apprentice boy who's turning the spit on this. There's a little bit more in this image. We do see tongs, and we've got some other cooking vessels off to the side, a basket, a bucket. We can see that he again has a shield to keep him from getting too much of the heat from that, but it's there's a basting spoon and a trough for catching the drippings, and even a chair off to the side if he ever gets a chance to do any resting, which probably it's like keep turning. We've got some miniatures. So a lot of the original things don't last. They get beat up and trashed, but toys that are miniatures of these items are still around. So we get kind of picture of that. And here's this wonderful little metal bucket. Sometimes they were cooking in items like this, or it's probably what this is intended to be a miniature of. 1757. This is just 3.6 centimeters. It's just an inch and a half tall, inch and a half in diameter. Finely crafted little toy bucket here. Another little cooking vessel, probably from a very similar kind of set, a little bit bigger, 6 centimeters across. So again, copper legs, little matching brass lid and everything. This is what we use for the a tavern scene. That's the thanks for coming, and we have lots of hooks and items on the left hand side for holding the meat up in the kitchen. When we look back into the cooking area, we can see the wonderful complicated jack on the wall for turning the spits, this banked fire and multiple places to put spits across there. Also the crane for holding the pot over the fire, and plates and things. Boy, this is the kitchen I would really want to visit if I could pop
Yes.
into the 18th century. This is probably the one I'd want to pop into the most. Understand what was going on with not only the kitchen area, but what the tavern was really like. Such a sort of open door here on the right. It's like, where's that going to lead to? And we can even see the stew stoves off to on the extreme right hand side. Forged forks of the time period. We even have a 3-tined fork, which is much more difficult to make than the typical 2-tined fork that you see. Raised hearth and fires in the background, and you might scoff at the idea of them having that big of a fire to cook with, but if I know them, they were probably it's difficult to get those smoke hoods to get a good draft, and they'll just fill that room with smoke unless you have a nice fire going that's really, makes it draw well. So we've got a iron, a vessel that's got that's closest to the fire's metal. Backed off of the fire is ceramic. Even the one that's over the coals is another ceramic item. A shovel for coals, because you're always working that fire. So today, hey, you turn the knob and it's exactly where you want it to be, but not so much in the 18th century. And then we have these cooking vessels in the foreground that we've kind of seen a lot of so far. There's even a little brass saucepan. There we go. There's our toaster, which
very fine toaster.
Rich still carries toasters, right?
Yep.
So we can get a toaster almost exactly like that from Townsend's if you need a toaster.
That's right.
Not quite as automatic, but as toasters today. And there's, we're in the sort of courtyard area. Is she doing? No, she's cleaning fish or something.
I believe. Yeah.
But we can see into the kitchen. We can see some of the cooking items that are out here. There's a pot scrubber. There's a knife. There's the wooden bucket and something on the floor there that's got green stuff in it. Maybe that's a colander and she's rinsed off something. And the classic Dutch door thing going on there. So wonderful image. Here's a miniature of a tiny little gridiron or grill. Our inventory had a gridiron in it, and there are a lot of these similar ones. Here is a very fuzzy picture, but a good picture of a dough trough, which was mentioned in the inventory. Wonderful little saucepan and stand. So many of these saucepans had legs built into them, but this one has a matching stand that it fits perfectly into. We've got a mill for grinding maybe coffee, something
Yeah,
similar.
I think this one's coffee.
Right.
And I think the next one is maybe coffee, maybe spice. It could be either one.
Yeah. Probably, maybe, I don't know.
This one said spice to me.
Right.
That's what I envisioned.
Exactly.
But it wasn't specific
Right.
about which
and
one.
even the brewery had a mill in it for grinding up those malted grains. So there we go. We did it. That was a lot of images, so I kind of spun through some of those quickly, but that's because we'd be here all day if we wanted to look at all those cool images all day. Every week I try to get to the brand new and renewing YouTube members and new Patreon people. I don't have a new Patreon, but I do have, that's not the right one, that's last week. Here we go. Kemper Beard, Lori Sews Stuff, Devin Whiteside, California K, Antane, Kingdom Minded Warrior, Abraham Rothrock, that was kind of hard to say, Larissa Myers McCoyne, Sean Blair, Josh M, David and Peta Woolsey, Kyle Snavely, Leslie Bradley, and Hey Cool It. Great name. Great name. Okay. We even have a few cooking things. In the past, we've had much larger mortar and pestles. Right now, we just have a small mortar and pestle. You can imagine, the mortar and pestles of the time period were the sort of the meat processor or the food processors, and you'll find them with, that are like this big around, especially early on, and just, be able to kind of smoosh on really, really big stuff. And they really had a thing about like mangling meat until it was pate and these things, and
Probably because their meat was a lot tougher than ours.
could be, or their teeth were rotten.
Right? Their dental health
Think
was
about
not as
that.
robust.
Lots of iron cookware that everybody has to have. If you're cooking over the fire, you're going to have these long-handled Oh, you don't want to get too close. Let me tell you, I have to get close to the fire because it's like, John, I need to see you in the shot. And I'm like catching on fire trying to make these videos. Get closer, John, get closer.
You need to get that fire in the shot. It looks really good.
Hooks for hanging right, you can hang this right up over the fire with the meat hanging on it, or put it up high for your meat to smoke right there in your kitchen. A lot of times, like, we think about having a smokehouse. Well, their house was the smokehouse, if you really want to know. We saw it over and over again in those images. Basically, your kitchen is full of S-hooks. We don't need too many S-hooks in our kitchens today, but their kitchens were full of items like that. We didn't see any Pipkin-specific images, but you'll find these little ceramic pipkins and items. Sometimes they'll have little legs, sometimes they won't. In the time period, we use these in the videos all the time. Again, they're ceramic. They take a very gentle fire. Generally, you put them over just a little bit of coals and off they go. Let's see, out of the shot, these big pitchers. Of course, you've got to have your standard kitchen knives. You see these sort of showing up in your images. I don't know, usually by the time you see the knife, it's kind of small and you can't see the detail of it, but lots of that going on in your typical 18th century kitchen. I'm gonna take a breath.
Okay, are you ready for some questions?
Yes.
Okay, here we go. So there is a couple new members. So there's Eric Marshall, a new member, and then there's a member chat from the German frontier. Thanks for all your work. And then there's a question from a super chat from Max Arcool. I've seen a couple historical videos that show stew stoves similar to the picture you shared. How are those venting smoke? Is it just going into the room?
Yeah, that's exactly what's going on. It is going just straight up into the room. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why kitchens sometimes were separate from the house. Because it's just going to be, smoky. It's going to be really, really hot. The smoke funnels don't work very well. I can guarantee you they don't work well because of the one we work with, and you'll find that multiple things are kind of sharing the same kind of chimney, and so many of those, sometimes it was almost like they just vented the ceiling, right? So it's just like you get up to the top and there would be a window up there, and they would just let all the smoke from the entire room just sort of go up and out the window, because there's no good way to get direct ventilation down there.
And then there is a new member, the Bad Idea Lab. And then there is a super chat from Speed and Style Tony. Did they have stone mortars?
Yeah, so the one I use most of the time in the videos is a marble mortar, and you'll find images of marble mortars, and sometimes rather large ones in the time period, and they're really the best kind to work with. Now, a marble one generally doesn't have legs to it, and it has to set in some kind of a ring, or even a large, like a wooden log with a dip cut out of the middle of it, so you can set that mortar into it and really get into it. And they'll have a pestle that will be very large, so that they can get their weight behind it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so here's some questions that showed up throughout the thing. So this person was wondering if cast iron was super common in kitchens, or did they have more copper?
So that is changing through our time period, and as the technology of casting iron gets better and better, it takes over from some of those other materials. So cast brass and bronze things were popular in the 17th century and into the early 18th century, but then iron starts to really take over. And we'll see, especially as you get to, say, 1800 and the 19th century, it completely takes over, and some things just disappear completely and are only made with cast iron that before that were made out of sheet iron, or made out of sheet copper, brass, and even cast in copper and brass. So it's a shifting thing going on there.
So this person was pondering how often kitchen fires could have happened in the time period, and they were wondering if they kept like fire safety stuff, like a bucket of water right there by the fire.
Yes, is the answer. That it's always a damage, or always a concern. I believe it's one of the reasons why at Mount Vernon the kitchen is separate. So you see the big house when you see the classic image of Mount Vernon, and it's got these kind of wings that come out, almost like covered walkways. And on one side is the kitchen area, and it's separate from the house, so that if it caught fire, that it wouldn't burn the main house down. And that's where not only is it fire safety, but it's smoke and it's cooking smells and all that kind of good stuff. So it's protective in a lot of different ways. And it's having buckets with sand, buckets with water. We see that. So even in the images that we saw there was usually just a bucket standing there. Now that may be so that they could wash things or put things out or put themselves out or whatever was going on.
So this person was bringing up a couple different times. Someone else had asked how they lit the kitchen when they didn't have enough daylight, and whether the firelight was enough. But we saw, like in the inventory, they had candlesticks, and we saw a lot of candlesticks pictured.
Exactly. So having light is important. I think we'll even see, not only for light but for ventilation, you're going to have windows in your kitchens specifically for that, and they're kind of, sometimes they don't even really have glass in them or anything. They're just sort of holes in the wall, because you always need that, and you just deal with it being cold. But you'll see either the candlesticks or the which is less expensive, an oil lamp, like we saw in the Italian picture. It was that oil lamp way up high. Sometimes it's even on pulleys, so you can lower it down and light it all up and fill it up with oil. And the oil is a lot less expensive, and you would be using your waste oil from the kitchen to light it.
And somebody was wondering if you'd ever cooked by candlelight. But usually when you're cooking during the filming, you've chosen the lighting to work with the camera, and so it's not that dark.
It's not easy to cook in candlelight. Sometimes cooking in the cabin is pretty dark. Even though light comes down the chimney, you kind of see some with that. But most of the time, we're just cooking with the light of the fire and what little light there's coming in through the window, and it's challenging, definitely.
So somebody was bringing up reflector ovens. They were saying that they knew they were in the time period, but do you have a sense, but that we didn't see any in the images, do you have a sense of how common they might have been?
They're going to be in a well-to-do kitchen. I don't think you're going to find them in very poor places. And they're, tinware is again getting more popular as we go into the 19th century. And I think a lot of the reflector ovens that we see are 19th century. I'm not sure how many images of 18th century reflector ovens I have seen. Undoubtedly they're there. It's just probably not nearly as common.
You had mentioned the blue bottle from the inventory, and somebody was wondering if the blue bottle specifically was indicating something specific being stored inside it.
It's a good question, and I don't know the answer to it. I don't know why. I think they probably just wrote it down because most of the bottles were green, and it was like, this one's blue, and that's not normal.
So somebody was asking about weather recently and how the Nutmeg Village fared during the storms that we had.
Well, you don't want to know.
Well, I was thinking that the computers did not like it. But
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah, there's definitely some fixing needs to go in Nutmeg Village.
You could tell that we had some spring shenanigans
But the
going on.
chickens are all still there.
They didn't get blown away. So somebody was wondering about the ovens. They were wondering if the ovens were always outside, like the earthen ovens, or whether they had inside ones.
I would say that it's maybe, I don't even know how to say that it would be 50-50 or not, but there you have a lot of indoor ovens, but they can be very, very small, just sort of like little cubby holes, basically. They're writing about that, and kind of you'll find people giving advice about how big the kitchen or oven should be, what the shape should be on the inside. We see images of period ones with basically a hearth and then this kind of built-in oven. Occasionally we've even shown images where you can see the oven from the outside of the house, even though it's on the inside. So the brickwork is kind of showing up on the outside of the house, and it's obviously the oven portion of the fireplace. Yeah, I don't know how to say whether one was tremendously more popular or not. My impression is that it's a very regional kind of thing. So in places like, say Canada, they would talk about seeing these outdoor ovens. Now, the idea that somebody traveling in the area would say, look at all these outdoor ovens, says to me, well, yeah, outdoor ovens were popular there, and they weren't popular wherever the writer was from. So there's a lot to kind of read into some of those.
So this person was interested in the kitchens and how they would differ between a small house and a public house and a large estate, and how they would be equipped differently. So do you have a sense about that, other than that they absolutely would have been?
Yeah, I mean, in small and poor situations, people are living basically in one room, and the kitchen. Well, that you mean the fireplace where everything happens. So I mean, it goes down to that where the kitchen is the room where everyone lives basically, and is very rudimentarily put together and equipped versus we see these giant, basically, like if you go to Hampton Court, the King Henry VIII's kitchen, and it's huge, like a gymnasium, but they're cooking for literally hundreds of people daily. So you've got the entire gamut there, and everything in between. So the kitchen that we read the inventory of, that's going to be a pretty big room, and it's going to be just the kitchen,
And that's probably an estate, perhaps not a large estate, but an estate.
Yes,
where
exactly.
They have quite a range of equipment.
Right.
So this one is a super chat from Eric F. If you badly dented your copper pot or broke a cast iron tool, could you get it repaired or even sell it for scrap?
So copper pot, yes. Cast iron, not so much, right? There's not a lot you can do with cast iron when it's broken. It's one of the bad things about cast iron. It can take a lot of punishment, but when it's broken, it's broken. Versus a copper pot, which you can patch, you can solder new pieces in it, you can do all sorts of things, and it's much more useful as a scrap. So you could take your copper pot and you might cut it up into little pieces and make it in jewelry. I mean, they did all kinds of crazy things with leftover pieces like that, depending on where they're at and what the uses would be. I have a brass vessel somewhere, cooking vessel around here, that has repair work on it. So you can see how it cracked, and they did riveting and put repair pieces in it.
Mm-hmm. So this person was wondering about the miniatures, whether they would be something that a traveling salesman might be selling, or would they be a toy? And Mostly I've seen them used in high-end dollhouses.
Exactly.
And mostly by the Dutch. They seem to love that sort of thing.
It's as far as I know. I mean, I have seen obviously like miniature tools and things that salesmen would have, but generally that's probably a later 19th century thing and 20th century thing. We are probably looking at toys here.
Okay. Have you ever run across Franklin stoves?
Yes. So Franklin, puts together his stove idea in the middle of the 18th century, and how it really works, I don't know that they actually worked very well. And so, but later on, they get adapted and modified, and it becomes a thing much later on in the 18th century, and of course, reproductions. Even today, especially in the 20th century, I have one myself, so I'm familiar with that. But they talk about I've read more than one person talking about Franklin stoves and kind of mentioning the concept. It was definitely something new, and Europeans would look at it. Although the French had metal sheet work kind of stove things also, so they're just not really popular, and they don't turn into this is where people cook and the range idea and cast iron until we get to the early 19th century, and then it just takes over, and all of a sudden, like the classic example is north of here about 30 miles is a series of cabins, log cabins from this area, and as time goes on in the 19th century, the cabins, now these are just cabins somebody's moved, they don't have fireplaces in them because they always had a cast iron stove in them. Once you got to about 1840, nobody bothered to make fireplaces.
So, were pickled items common in the 18th century? And if so, what kind of pot might they have been using to do that pickling in?
Yes, and they're going to be pickled in ceramic pickling vessels. Depending on what you're pickling and how easy it is to get in and out of it, you might have something that's pickled in glass, but it's not very often.
And then someone else was wondering if you'd seen any references to pickled meat in the time period. They had done some venison, and it turned out great.
Sure. So sometimes it's the salt pork that's kept in a brine is called pickled pork, and soused items are similar in that vein. So yes, they're pickling meat.
And then someone else was wondering, do you have a sense for what the most common cooking vessels would have been for just common people?
Right. So one of the vessels that we use the most is, it looks like a tin bucket, and that's what they're using. Whether it's a brass version of that, a copper version, or the inexpensive tin version, and it might have straight sides. It might have kind of more of the slightly flared out sides, but that is the simplest and most common cooking vessel that you see over and over again. It's less expensive than a cast iron pot. They're a lot lighter if you're going to be carrying them and you're a soldier, and yeah, there you go.
They just work great for a lot of it.
Well, I don't know that they work great. They're just the least expensive way to do that. And we so many times, if you get pots and pans, you have frying pans and you have saucepans. That's what we cook in, right? And sometimes we have stock pots. But they did like in simple kitchen situations, they did not have very many saucepans. They're just cooking in
doing a lot of boiling just for that reason.
This is basically like a stock pot, but they're using it for everything.
Okay, I think we're all caught up.
We did it. We did it. That was a lot of kitchen stuff there. But we covered that. So we use it so much. We, today we interact so much with kitchens. It's just one of those There's always more to learn about what's going on in the kitchen. And isn't that really the heart of the house anyway? You know, that's where the living and breathing heart of the house is. It's like the rest of it is, well, you know, I'll spend some time, you know, you just sleep in a bedroom. Boring. You know. Thank you so much for your wonderful questions and your care of us here on the channel. Again, thank you if you came by and said hi at Kalamazoo and shook hands, and even if you were too shy to shake hands and say hi, thank you for coming by anyway. Thank you for your support in purchasing merch or supporting us as members on Patreon or whatnot. If you're a Patreon person, watch for an email, because there's something in Patreon land that we're going to be working on very, very soon. We have been working on. So thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Ivy, and everyone out there. I hope you have a tremendous weekend, and thanks for watching and coming into the Nutmeg Tavern today.